You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast.
It is a real joy for us to welcome you all here. Habemus Papam.
Rebuilding Catholic culture, restoring Catholic tradition.
Hello and welcome to the OnePeterFive podcast. I'm Steve Skojek, and in today's episode number 58, I'm going to be talking with Tim Gordon. Tim and I recorded a podcast late last night. You will notice the change in the color of my shirt. I did not stay up, and I'm not committed enough to the consistency of the appearance to put a dirty shirt back on this morning. Sorry, just not going to do it. So we had a good conversation last night, but it ended late, and just wanted to give a brief intro to what we're going to be talking about, which is the new post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Querida Amazonia, which is, basically a love letter to the Amazon. Dear Amazon, beloved Amazon, from Pope Francis, which came out yesterday. There's a lot to talk about within that document, and we're not going to get into a lot of the specific details. People were concerned going into this, not knowing what was going to be in the document when it came out. They were concerned particularly about whether it would relax priestly celibacy in the Amazon region, which would then spread to the rest of the world. It did not explicitly do that. Whether it would move things in the direction of the ordination of women to the diaconate, it did not do that. But what it did do was something unconventional. It piggybacked the final synod document. The way it was done is through an official presentation. Pope Francis says in the opening paragraphs of the exhortation that he was officially presenting the final synod document with all of its open-ended questions, and he wanted everyone to read it and basically made the two documents, designed them to be read in tandem. And there's some argument and discussion over whether the formula that he used to do it was intended to try to make the final synod doc magisterial. And then there are technical questions about that. So Tim and I are going to talk about a lot of that stuff. We're not going to get to the nitty-gritty. We're not going to get to the pagan elements, the enculturation elements that are, I think, they've been one of the understated concerns about what was going to come out of this, because the more imminent threat to the priesthood was, I think, what was on a lot of people's minds. But there's stuff that's going to have to be parsed out, and that'll come in future days and weeks. And we'll probably be discussing this for months. So those things are all going to get dealt with. It's interesting because, we talked about this last night, and it's all still really fresh in a lot of people's mind. And Tim and I are sort of the odd men out. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to have the discussion with him. We're sort of the odd men out in that we think, a lot of people thought that this was a victory, that the release of this was a victory because it didn't explicitly say the things people were afraid it was going to say. And Tim and I are of the opinion that because it formalized the final synod document that did say all those things, and because the spokesmen for the Pope are saying all of that stuff is still on the table, ordaining married men, women deacons, all this stuff, it's all still on the table. Those proposals are all still there. That we didn't get rid of anything. We just had our guard, our defenses taken down by the manner of presentation. Now, one of the questions that's come up and has been discussed a reasonable amount is the fact that it was less explicit a result of this book that came out by Cardinal Sarah and Pope Benedict. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that Sandra Magister, who's really considered by many to be the top Vaticanista over there in Rome, published something today, and it was, came out after Tim and I talked. It's really unsourced, which makes it kind of hard. I tend to trust Magister, but there's no sourcing here at all. And he talks about how Cardinal Sarah and Pope Emeritus Benedict are having this conversation, about this book, and about how when Ganswein is sort of not babysitting Benedict and he's at a papal audience with Francis, Benedict calls up Sarah. And it's when the pushback has already started on the book. And they have this conversation about it. Let me actually, rather than try to recount it to you, let me actually go and read it. So then on the morning of Wednesday, January 15th, while Pope Francis was holding his weekly general audience, with Ganswein sitting as usual by his side in the Paul VI Hall, and therefore far from the Mater Ecclesiae Monastery, which is the residence of the Pope Emeritus, whose secretary he is, Benedict XVI picked up the phone himself and called Sarah, first at home, where he did not find him, and then at the office, where the cardinal answered. Benedict XVI expressed his heartfelt solidarity with Sarah. He confided that he could not understand the reasons for such violent and unjust aggression, and he wept. Sarah wept too. The call ended with both of them in tears. This bothers me because this is not the kind of virile leadership that we're looking for. That we have a former pope and a significant cardinal who's the head of a major Vatican dicastery who are crying together over how mean everybody is to them because they kind of stood up for the truth a little bit. I hear from Catholics all the time who are beside themselves because of the scandals that are happening in the church, because of the corruption of doctrine and dogma, because of the idolatry. And Benedict, he's not addressing any of that. Nobody's making that confusion go away. And these Catholics are crying too. And when you stand up and say this stuff is wrong, you get attacked, you get personally attacked all the time, constantly. If you don't have the exact right theory that everybody wants you to have, you get personally attacked because people can't just disagree with you anymore. They want to destroy you. In the past week, I have had more than the usual number of personal attacks levied against me, against my family. Someone personally attacked my daughter because they disagree with me and tried to use that as a way to attack my character. Those of us who do not buy into the thesis that Benedict is still Pope are being accused of conspiracy, that we're getting marching orders from Rome, that we're paid opposition, that we're trad Inc. Then we've got the people out there who are just calling us grifters because us laymen who do this for a living, because that's how we have the time to do this work, but because we get paid to do this, we're grifters. And we're stealing from those of you who support us. I doubt you agree or you wouldn't be supporting us. I think that you're paying for content that you enjoy. Guys, we're here to do this because we believe that the truth matters. We believe that the church matters. We believe that if we don't stand up and say these things, nobody will. That's the belief. I went into this because I was worried about souls. That's it. I literally saw the landscape ahead of us. I saw this crisis developing like you see a storm on the horizon, dark clouds and lightning over there. And I saw a bunch of people just kind of having a picnic, not seeing the storm coming. And for whatever reason, I saw it. And I was like, this is going to be bad. We need to warn people. We need to build them up. We need to have community. We need to tell them that they're not crazy. We need to give them the faith. And then we need to oppose the errors. And so that, they're not alone, so that they don't feel alone. And that's what we do. And that's what we've always done. And in order to do this well, I had to throw myself into it full time. It's just what I had to do, because I used to be a freelance writer for the better part of a decade. And, you do it when you can. You're too busy working your other job and doing everything else. And it's not the same thing. You can't devote the time. So, I say to the people who don't like us, whatever, I'm sorry. Usually it's because you disagree, not because you think we're doing something wrong, but you try to spin it into something moral or ethical. Just go away, go find somebody else. Let the people who like this have it. So you'll hear Tim and I joking a little bit about this whole trad Inc. and grifter thing, because Tim gets accused of it now that he's doing it too. And it's like, sorry, it's work, and we have mouths to feed. But when I hear these guys crying because they got some criticism for this book, and because Francis pushed back on Benedict's name being on it and everything. And it's just like, how out of touch are you with the day-to-day existence of Catholics who are deeply struggling with this, who are really challenged in their faith because of this, who feel isolated and alone in their parishes, particularly if they don't have access to, a traditional Latin Mass parish, and they're surrounded by people who think Francis is the bee's knees. Everything's great, and they're alone, and they don't know what to do, and they just need to connect with people, even if it's people online, even if it's through publications like this and podcasts and videos. And they're like, I'm not crazy. Other people think the same thing. They're so isolated, but they're isolated in a different way. This ivory tower isolation, I just don't get. We need men who are strong. We need men who are going to stand up and fight. Those of you who saw the video that I put out the other day, the message to the bishops, I don't know that it's going to do any good. I don't think it will. Probably won't. But we need them to stand up. It is their job. We can't do that. We can't. I can't. Tim can't. Taylor can't. LifeSite can't. Nobody can. We can only inform you about what's going on. The bishops have apostolic authority. They are the only ones. And they need to show us that they care. Because they are our shepherds, whether we like it or not, whether we think they're competent or not, whether we think they care or not, it doesn't matter. They have the office. They have the authority. They need to do something. And so it's very frustrating when I see these men who are apostolic successors, men whose voices have clout. Do you really think that Benedict, that he doesn't have the most powerful voice in the church today? In part, in virtue of his relative silence. Magister's thesis, I'll link to the article, you can read it for yourself, but basically that Benedict wrote a statement of solidarity and it was suppressed and it's never been published, and Magister says he's seen it and it's, he believes that it was really written by Benedict, and this was what forced Francis to remove Gonswein from his position, and it's what forced him to tone down the exhortation because it was going to explicitly promote the ordination of viri probati. I don't know that I believe it. I just don't know. I don't think Francis is going to be that easily cowed. Maybe he was. But it's just really frustrating because Benedict hasn't been silent. He hasn't been silent. He said he was going to be. And you've got progressives in the church shrieking about how he needs to shut up. Saw a tweet this morning. He just needs to shut up. Part of me is like, maybe. Because when you only speak out on some things, you prove, first of all, that you're capable of speaking out, that you are not committed to the silence you said you were committed to. So I have a voice and I'm willing to use it. But then when you only speak out on some stuff and not other stuff, you're making a choice. You're making it clear, this is the thing I think is a priority. And all these other things, they don't matter. It's not worth my time. I'm not going to do that. So what it does is it gives the appearance of complicity in all the stuff that Francis is doing. Because Benedict hasn't directly opposed Francis on anything. The celibacy thing arguably is the closest, although, as I've stated before, Francis has always said his position was that he didn't want to get rid of voluntary celibacy. I think he's being underhanded about it. I think that he doesn't want to do it himself and that he's willing to let others do it. But, it's unprovable at this point. We can look at the evidence and stack it up and say he has definitely empowered and encouraged the people who want to get rid of celibacy, even though he's saying the other thing. So do you believe him? Do you not? I never believe him. However, I don't see this as a massive conflict between these two popes. But where is Benedict on all the other stuff? Where was he on Amoris Laetitia? Where is he on communion for the divorced and remarried? Where is he on Abu Dhabi? Where is he on the death penalty? Where is he on the idolatry? Where is he on any of this other stuff? The globalism, the population control people in the Vatican. He's not speaking up about all these other major issues. And so that's a choice. And in the meantime, we see him praising Francis and calling him a great theologian and saying that there's continuity between their pontificates despite differences in style and temperament. And saying that Francis's goodness is the place where he feels safe, whatever that means. So I kind of agree a little bit with the progressive critics that if he would not say anything, then at least we'd be like, well, you got to give him credit. The man honored his vow of silence. But he didn't. He's picking and choosing. And I get it. He's 92. When you're that age, stuff gets challenging. I have an elderly live-in parent who's approaching the age of 90, and every day is different. You know, sometimes things are remembered, sometimes they're not, sometimes there's energy, sometimes there's not, sometimes they sleep all day, sometimes they want to go do it's a mixed bag. It's different all the time because your body starts to work against you at that point in time. So I don't expect a great deal, but I can't really be sympathetic to the fact that, you know, he's sad because people are being mean to him for the little bit that he has said, when there's so much that he hasn't spoken out about and so many other people are taking it on the chin. I mean, I've never heard a story about Cardinal Burke crying because people are mean to him, and that guy's been treated like hot garbage. I've never heard Bishop Schneider say that. Archbishop Vigano is in hiding for his life. He's not whining about it. You know, and here's the other thing. This mess that we're dealing with, your angry successor, you left us with this. You made this mess. You left your job and he took over. So it is really hard for me to gin up sympathy for you suffering the consequences of quitting your job when you never should have left. What the heck? Like, where are the men? I get that it's upsetting, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a bad mood, but I just don't. I can't generate sympathy for that. So meanwhile, we're dealing with the real issues, and one of them is this exhortation. So Tim and I will be talking about that, and rather than me belaboring my monologue, I'll stop here, and we'll be back with Tim Gordon in just a minute. Stay tuned. Do you love OnePeterFive? Do you want to join in our fight? Go to OnePeterFive.com/donate today. Thank you for your support.
You're listening to the One Peter podcast.
That was close. Let's try one more time.
You're listening to the One Peter Five cast.
One more try. You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast. Oh, okay. Try again.
You're listening to the One podcast.
One last try.
No.
You're done. Okay. You're listening to the OnePeterFive podcast. Thanks for listening.
I want to do that again.
With me now to discuss today's exhortation is Tim Gordon, teacher of philosophy and theology, co-host of the popular YouTube show Rules for Retrogrades, and co-author of a forthcoming book by the same name. Tim, thank you for finally being on the podcast. Not like I invited you before, but thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks a million. Great to be here with you, bud.
Fellow grifter. So...
Grifters Inc.
Grifters Inc. Yeah, that's a wholly owned subsidiary of Trad Inc. So the exhortation, which we're here to talk about today, is it's kind of short by the standards of Pope Francis at about 16,000 words, but that's still a decent chunk of reading. And unlike me, I know you've gone through the whole thing. I don't want to get too into the weeds on everything it discusses because I kind of want to come at this from the macro view and try to get our arms around it. So It was sort of a mystery coming in. We didn't know what to expect. There's the misdirection of the leaked text. And then that didn't make it into the document. And now it's here. And as usual with this pontificate, seems to be generating sort of a Rorschach test of reactions from people on all sides. So I wanted to kind of ask you, what do you think the big expectations were going into this, and were they met?
It's a good question. In terms of expectations, I was talking about this with my brother Dave yesterday, and I knew, there's a tendency there among even between two retrograde brothers I'm more mistrustful of the Pope. And I said it's not theological, it's historiographical and it's biographical.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, me and you are in lockstep like
Yeah.
that. I've read you for years, so I happen to know that. Dave is more looking at the text, and the entire point of Francis synodality created by Vatican II, and the latter half of the Francis pontificate is being post-textual, where you literally have to deal in the actions entailed by text, and that's when you figure out what it means, right? So I said, Dave, maybe we should do our own videos, splice them together, and just say, hey, we're honest about our reactions to this, and there's a varying spectrum, there's varying poles of reasonable reactions to this. And at first he was like, well, let's do it together, because I actually think that Francis is out, and now I think I'm going to agree with you, Tim. And I said, because you asked about expectations, I said, what do you mean agree with me? Because, dude, it's not going to be a clear out and out let your yes mean yes or your no means no, because that's not how he works. Like, I've studied him biographically the way you have. And he was like, what, like a footnote, like in Amoris Laetitia in chapter 8? And I said, well, yes, it'll be a footnote that's not a footnote. And Dave was still saying, as of last night, we were thinking of trying to wait up for this thing to be released. He was like, well, let's do it together. But if I don't think it's that sinister, then I guess I'll do my own video. And neither of us waited up till 3 noon Rome time, February 12th. And when I got up this morning, he's like, I guess we have to do our own, because I think it's good. And I was just like, I told you it would be a footnote that's not a footnote. You know what I mean? I mean, we've talked about it on and off throughout the whole day, so I know we agree. But
well, I talked to you first before anyone else. So, I brought my kids to school, and I came back, and immediately I had the message from you, hey, can you give me a call? And so we talked about it, and I don't know, it's been a long day. I mean, we've been at this for over 12 hours talking about this today. I don't even know how many hours. I mean, you were up at 4. I started looking at this a little later, but and the weird thing is, I kind of feel like we have to stay focused on just the first few paragraphs of the exhortation for now, because that's where the footnote that's not a footnote happens.
That's precisely right. Yeah.
And the reason for that is because it's in those first few paragraphs that he basically says, hey, by the way, I want to officially present to you this final synod document that, was already out. Everybody had access to it already, and it has all the weird proposals in it. And he's like, I want you to read it, and I'm going to recommend it to you. And it kind of goes in tandem with this exhortation. And the exhortation is clean. I mean, it doesn't mention celibacy. It doesn't mention ordination. It doesn't mention any of the stuff that people were really worried about, which I think, there are multiple issues going into this, obviously. I think enculturation is full of a lot of stuff that needs to get unpacked, and paganism and all that stuff. So setting that aside, the two big things were, is there going to be a provision for ordaining married men, married deacons, and then using that as the camel's nose under the tent so that it can spread like all the other adults have? Right. And is there going to be some solid progress toward the idea of ordaining women to the diaconate? And the answer to both in the exhortation was no. But he attached that final synod document to it, and that had all that stuff in there. And so, what was your take on that?
Yeah, straight up, what does the attachment mean? Legally, you can attach a document where it becomes like constitutionally part of another document. And also, I guess canonically, Pope Francis took labors in September of 2018 to make a change where a synod final doc can be part of the post-synodal apostolic exhortation if the Pope signals so. So what we're talking about here, it's kind of like the Clinton impeachment. Like, what is the definition of is?
Exactly. I've been thinking that all day.
All day. And I told my brother that this is what we would end up talking about today. And I guess he didn't believe me, because that's what we're doing. Does the term officially presented, I was doing an etymology in 10 languages on presented, what it means. Does that equate to the language contemplated by the 2018 Constitution? I'm forgetting what it's called.
It's called Episcopalis Communio.
Good man. Yeah,
I actually remembered that. I didn't have it in front of me, so I get like a gold star for that.
You do. You did. You dropped your eye. You recall. You drop your eyes into the right. I've learned that by talking to someone that's
micro expressions. We've got another season of what was that show with the lies? The guy who detected the lies. It's coming, and you're going to be the star.
Oh,
True
yeah,
Lie.
yeah.
I don't remember what it was called. Lie to Me. That's what it was. It was a great show.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was about reading those expressions. Sorry, I digress.
Yeah. No. I mean, eyeball digress. That's what it was. So in that particular constitution, it says if the Pope expresses gives express consent or something like that.
The exact wording is, I'll read it because I did find it. Here it is. If it is okay, let me back up to the beginning of this section. It's Article 17, where he's laying out these new guidelines for synod processes, and when it comes to the section on delivery of the final document of a synod to the Roman Pontiff, it says, once the approval of the members of the synod has been obtained, the final document of the assembly is presented to the Roman Pontiff, who decides on its publication. If it is expressly approved, so that's the phrase we're looking for, by the Roman Pontiff, the final document participates automatically, I guess, in the ordinary magisterium of the successor of Peter. And then there's another provision about if deliberative power is given to the synod, the same basic thing applies. But this idea of express approval. So what does that mean?
Yeah, remember when you're like in middle school or as a kid, and you would like your friend would lie to you, and you might have been like, okay, you really mean this is a real you're giving me your word, and then they give you the word and they break and they say, well, I didn't promise. Promises don't have to be self-referential. Neither does express approval. Right? Approval just means it's approval that's expressed. I heard you trying to explain this to someone earlier today. Maybe it was Dave Gordon, my brother. But you don't have to say, I promise, for something to be a promise. If someone says, did you stick your hand in the cookie jar, Steve?
Yeah.
And you said, no, I really didn't. I'm giving you my word. That's a promise. So one does not have to say, I am expressly approving. One has to say something like, I am officially presenting. Presenting in the sense of delivering, like delivering a play or a performance.
Right.
That's an attachment. So
yeah, and recommending everyone reads it because it's good, and you should read it with this because it goes together. I mean, that first of all, that's not disapproval.
Right.
So what is it?
Precisely. I wanted to let that question stand.
I don't think it can be neutral. I don't think there's a neutral value that can be assigned to here. Read this thing. I'm telling you, it's really important, and I'm officially presenting it, but I'm not approving of it. I mean, I'm the Pope, but whatever. You might find stuff in there you don't like, and I can't speak to. Who does that? The Pope doesn't do that.
Right. Yeah, precisely. And hold on. This is one thing that's really important. I had friends that are agreeing with me and you on Twitter all day, and they're all giving analogies. Oh, this is like a shell game. This is like a cup game. You know what it's really like? Simon Says. Baldessari is out there saying, well, this is not a formal connection. This is not a magisterialization of the synod doc. And
Simon Peter didn't say.
Simon Peter didn't say it right. That's
but basically, I mean, it's like, who's Baldessari? Why does he get to? I mean, this is a guy who had a book written about his manipulation of the last synod. I know. This is not a guy you trust.
I know. But other people are, but this is what I mean, where literally because it's a game of misdirection, like Simon Says, right? Simon Says, sit down. Simon Says, blink your eyes, stand up. It's throwing people as it's meant to do.
Right.
I believe Cerny, who was all throughout the day giving interviews, he gave one to Diane Montaigne. After that, he gave one to America Magazine, where he was saying, go read the Synod final doc. And then Montaigne kept saying, well, so what about these two issues, the very two you named, Steve? And he kept saying, go read the Synod Doc. And she was like, okay, even though it doesn't really make an appearance one way or the other in the Apostolic Exhortation, he was like, yes, go read the Synod Doc.
And she was specifically asking about female ordination, sacramental ordination. And she's saying,
Yes.
is that precluded? And he wouldn't answer her. He's like, I can't say that. Go look at the Synod Doc. The Pope's going to call this commission back up, and you're going to have to wait for the results. He refused to say, absolutely not. That's not possible.
Yes. But if he was tipping his hand one way, it was the other direction. It was, well, the Synod Doc makes it very clear.
Right.
It makes the the abrogation of priestly celibacy in the Synod, in the Amazon, more clear. But yeah, he was tipping his hand if one way. If it was more than neutral, it was the other direction.
And in his interview with America magazine, he said that the name of the exhortation is Querida Amazonia, and he says that Querida Amazonia does not resolve or close any of the questions from the Synod Doc. So he's explicitly saying they're all still on the table, which he said at the presser, he said to Montaigne, and he said it to America magazine.
Right, and he's more Simon. He's not Simon Peter, the Pope. Only the Pope can tell us, which he will do post-textually, the way he did with Amoris Laetitia. It was open until the Buenos Aires bishops gave an interpretation, the liberal interpretation, Casper's interpretation of the 2015 Synod, and he said that's the only correct one. Then he put it into the magisterium there. Notably, he did not say, oh, it's already in the magisterium, because this is a low magisterial doc. So
actually I want to address that, because I went back because I was trying to remember how things unrolled with Amoris Laetitia, because it was very similar, right? So the way I wrote it down, because I wanted to make sure I had things in order, the process went like this. We have the footnote that allows communion for the divorced and remarried in chapter 8. Then Francis pretends he doesn't even remember the footnote when he's asked about it. That was a little fun game that he played where he's like, oh, I don't really remember. Then his buddies start exploiting the footnotes. Spadaro was particularly useful here. There were a couple of other people that were really pushing the idea of, yeah, it's time for communion for the divorced and remarried.
Yeah.
Then he gets a letter from the bishops of the Buenos Aires region saying that they're giving communion according to their new pastoral guidelines to the remarried, and he commends them, saying there's no other interpretation of his teaching. Then he takes his own letter and puts it in the Acta Apostolica Sedis, which there's debate. It's not necessarily that makes it magisterial, but that is a compendium of the official acts of the Holy See. So it makes it an official act of his pontificate, but there's debate among theologians. Does that make it magisterial, or does it just make it official? So again, we're down to parsing these words. But then, and we had talked about this earlier today, and I didn't have a citation, so I found it. Last year, he was visiting monks in Thailand during his Asia trip, and he came out, Jesuits in Thailand, which is when he lets his freak flag fly, and he says that chapter 8 of Amoris Laetitia, where the loaded footnote is, quote, the magisterium of the church, end quote.
I remember. Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is Cardinal Burke came out immediately in April of 2016 when Amoris Laetitia came out, and he instantly said, this is not magisterial, and that Pope Francis has made it clear that it's not magisterial. He did so by, right in the opening paragraphs of the document, basically saying it's not for everybody. It's going to vary according to culture. You can't make something magisterial that's not universal, that's not binding, that's pastoral in nature, and that it's going to be relativized.
Right.
So Burke's initial argument of it's not magisterial is the argument we're hearing today. But Francis, 3 years later, says explicitly, it's magisterial. And I'm wondering, why should we expect this to be any different?
Precisely. It would only be different if one could come up with a reasonable distinction for how a post-synodal document would be attached to a apostolic exhortation by kind of laborious effort in conjunction with the 2018 September Constitution. You remembered the name. and not have it be at least as indicative of the magisterium of Pope Francis as is the exhortation itself, which is, I mean, what is, all we have to ask is this: what does the connection or the attachment mean? That why is Cerny, Cardinal Cerny, out there insisting on it? And I think this is really the essence of what is synodality. It's reaching its apotheosis in the pontificate of Francis. Is he's really into synodality. It's rumored that the next synod will be on the eternal nature of synodality itself. And this, well, I was getting into a Twitter debate with a guy, and he was saying, well, the synod doc isn't the last word, the exhortation is the last word. And I said, that's before the concept of synodality really comes.
Clearly that's not the case, or he wouldn't have pointed back to it.
Precisely. That's what we learned in 2016. And guys like you and me and a few others are saying, were you guys just sleeping, Rip Van Winkle, for all of April 2016 through April of 2020? I try to learn as I go through these things. I'm surprised how many people, the demographics have shifted a little bit, but how many people are spouting rhetoric that feels like it's obviously empty to me. I mean,
well, and I think one of the problems that we're running into here, again, coming to the question of who do you believe? You know, do you believe these guys who constantly deceive us, who, you know, for Francis, Peronism, you know, the famous anecdote of Juan Perón telling everybody in the room contradictory things because it was what they wanted to hear, and just constantly telling people they were right, even though one after another was saying the 180-degree opposite thing of the person after them. And this idea that Henry Sire in his book, The Dictator Pope, really tried to emphasize that he's the ecclesiastical Juan Perón, that this was his political hero, and he really imbibed that ideology. So you have that. So you have two things. You have the reality, theologically speaking, of what is magisterial, what are the criteria for something to be magisterial, how authoritative is it binding, is it extraordinary, is it ordinary and universal, is it infallible, is it non-infallible? There's all these categories, and they're kind of a mess. And it's one of the big problems with this pontificate is this stuff still needs to be hammered out much more clearly because the terms have all evolved, and it's a mess. But so on the one hand, I argued today in my article that I think that the express approval, you know, that condition was met by officially promulgating this. But on the other hand, and I didn't say this in my article, and I think I probably should have, I left some nuance on the cutting room floor. I don't think that just because there's an apostolic constitution that says if the Pope approves it, then it's automatically magisterial, that's how it works. I mean, he also said Amoris Laetitia is magisterial, and it's clearly pastoral. Just because he waves his magic wand and says it's magisterial doesn't make it so. He said years ago that he believes his interviews are magisterial, but they're not. And so, you know, there's these levels and layers of reality versus perception. There's what Francis thinks magisterium is, and then everybody on his side says, yep, it's magisterial. You have to, hey, Lumen Gentium 25, you need to give your religious obsequium to this, and you have to submit your heart and mind. And it's like, hold on. Magisterium means something. It has a category. It has to be de fide. It has to be something that binds. It has, you know, whatever. The propositions have to be out there for the universal church, and they have to teach something that we're obligated to believe and all this stuff. So without getting into the morass of trying to define magisterium right now, which I will fail off the top of my head, and I have to reference it every freaking time because I always mess up part of the definition.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah,
real
please
quick,
do.
Without going into the morass. What people can all kind of pat themselves on the back and have a Snickers bar or some comfort food or something on the concept of ordinary papal magisterium. Friends, well-wishers, we're still working out what that is.
We are.
Right? I mean, like, Vatican I was interrupted by the Franco-Prussian War, and all the Francis pontificate points out is we never got real gloss on the papal extraordinary exercise of magisterium is clear enough, right? I mean, when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, he's done it twice in 2,000 years. It's not that big of a deal because even Francis hasn't been tempted to do it. JP2 promised he never would, so it doesn't really concern him. That's fine. That's clear. But the ordinary exercise of the papal magisterium is so unclear that I'm not sure I really care, to be just fully frank, whether or not you call Amoris Laetitia or QA. I'm just going to call it QA, Carita Amazonia. I'm not sure it matters whether they're magisterial or not. And now we have the question, the footnote in AL, and we have the paragraph 3 in QA. It doesn't matter whether those things are really attached to the two exhortations, 2016 and 2020 respectively. All that matters is, to me, this is just, I'm sharing my perspective today, February 12th. I mean, they're dragging souls away from heaven into hell. And that's what really matters with Amoris Laetitia. You're giving sanction as the Pope, whether it's magisterial or not, to obdurate sinners receiving the communion. And in this case, you are, it remains to be seen what he's going to do, but presumably it might make female deacons, which is doctrinal in its nature, and it will do something untoward to the sacerdotal order. So that's what really matters. It's become
an attack on the priesthood. Absolutely.
It's an existential thing. It's an attack on the priesthood that's existential in its nature. And I think we're getting, again, I think it has more to do with the inherent badness of the acts being contemplated. I don't think he cares whether it's magisterial or whoever the bad guys end up being in this. The concern is the concept of synodality, meaning that we live in a post-textual magisterium where you can just shove through whatever. There's a great article by Raymond D'Souza. I was very happy to see that Ed Penton had tweeted it out, where he says what Pope Francis writes in these exhortations is less important than the way that he expresses them. And that's at the heart of all this. And the people that don't believe you or me, Steve, they're still getting there to this idea that it's the process that matters.
Well, and I wonder if they're being exploited, honestly, because I don't know if that's a cognizant thing on his part and on the part, this is one of the reasons I don't like conspiracy theories, is because it gives human beings, men, too much credit, and they have limited capacities to reason and to understand and to see the grand scheme and to play 15-dimensional chess. I mean, there's only so much they can do. Now, granted, there are preternatural forces at play that have much more capacity in that regard, but I feel like the way that they're approaching this stuff is almost an intentional exploitation of traditional Catholic piety and docility to authority of the church. It's like, well, no, I mean, this is what the text says. The text says this. And so that's the truth. And it's like, no, don't look at what they say. Look at what they do.
Right.
And then you sound crazy when you say that, because people have been taught for a very long time, no, the church teaches, it writes it down. We know what it teaches because it writes it down and we can read it. And this is what it says. But it gets exploited and it slows us up. So what did we see today? We saw a lot of people on our side, celebrating, saying, hey, this is a victory for the Holy Spirit. The Pope was thwarted. He wasn't able to do this stuff, or the Germans were thwarted. And it's like, no, there's no victory here. The best that we've got here is that it isn't explicitly mentioned, but we are told explicitly that it's all still on the table and they're still developing all this stuff. And now when all eyes are off the exhortation and everybody's defenses are down, they're just going to run this stuff through while we're all distracted with something else.
Precisely. That's what I meant when I said it becomes a real life instantiation of a process philosophy. I hate it. I'm a man of text. You're a man of text. I've read things that you publish and you write for a long time. I've been in and out of grad school for half of my married life, and I'm very comfortable reading and writing. And so I'm not one of these guys. I have a scholar's heart. So I'm much more comfortable in that mode than in this existential process mode where I have to start analyzing someone's behavior. At the same time, I don't know. I just think I think you and I have good instincts on this because, like I told Dave, it's biographical more than it's theological when it comes to Francis, and that's what synodality is. It's look at what I do, not what I write. other people, I like what you said about their obdurate refusal to look outside of the four corners of the text. It's also an obdurate refusal to look at history being repeated here. I feel exactly how I felt. I was just a writer then. I didn't go in front of screens back in April, whatever it was, April 12th, 2016. But I remember exactly where I was sitting on my couch and I was reading stuff from you and you're making sense. And everyone was like, yay, a victory. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's happened several times where I've written articles with headlines like, no, we didn't win.
We never win.
No, we don't. And the thing is that we keep thinking that we win because we're thinking in a very limited way and we're thinking inside the box. As somebody said to me yesterday, people don't think like criminals. They don't understand what it's like to think, how do I circumvent the law? How do I make sure that I get away with this thing that I'm trying to do? Especially Catholics who are trying to be good people and get to heaven. They don't think like that. And so it's a totally foreign framework to them. And then you've got this guy that comes from this Latin American dictatorship that's very corrupt. And that's, the formative ideology and then he's a Jesuit and that's corrupt. And that's the formative ideology theologically that he gets. He doesn't approach the world the way that we do. He just doesn't.
No.
And so we get tripped up every time. And it's Lucy and Charlie Brown in the football, and she moves it right when he goes to kick it every time. And we go for it every time.
Yeah, I think the ones that are shrewd, that are still falling for it, and guys like you and I are like, you didn't know past this prologue. I think like Dave, I think they feel duty bound to say, well, if the football moves, I guess if the goalposts are moving, I sort of have to honor that textually. It's a textual versus post-textual question. And I, like many of our friends that are falling for this or whatever we would call it, I want to live in a textual world too, where the magisterium, we've had the bad popes that everyone talks about, the Borgias and whatnot, but they were not trying to shift the magisterium of the Holy Catholic Church to a post-textual mode, the way Francis in number 266 is here. I'm comfortable living in text too, but we're not there. Wake up.
And living in text makes things easier, but it also has and has always had its inherent drawbacks. I mean, look at Sedevacantism. It's entirely rooted in personal judgment interpretations of papal texts, of conciliar texts, and so they compile this enormous library of proof texted quotes to prove their dead end position. And without the magisterium, the only authority on earth that can actually interpret those documents and apply them to real situations today, they're stuck in this ossified framework of, cum ex apostolatus said that, blah, 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 right? And they just throw words at you and you're like, but clearly look at what the implications of that are. Who are you to decide that this guy isn't the Pope? I mean, where did the church's authority go? And so you can get mired in the text and think, this is the world that I live in, and that's all there is. And so I also see the danger in doing that too much. And it's frankly, it's a temptation that I have because I want things to be clear, black and white. I want them to be structured. But the more I'm faced with the reality of what is actually going on in the church, the more I say, okay, I got to back up a step from this because there's more at work.
And in that mode of reasoning and that mode of being, I will say Francis retreats too. And how do we know? Because ultimately, the only goalpost that's been moved is that the apostolic exhortation, which is post-synodal, was supposed to be the last word, to revisit what I was saying with that one guy on Twitter.
Yeah.
But it's not like the goalposts have been pushed back infinitely or indefinitely. They've just been pushed back one step. So in other words, what happened with Amoris Laetitia, the ultimate exemplar for what's happening here today, is he did feel the need to ossify it for there to be a terminus, right? There were two more steps. First, there was the Buenos Aires bishops, and then there was the Jesuits, last year, as late as 2019. So even Francis knows that he has to bring it back, to a textual affirmation one way or the other.
There comes a point where time is greater than space needs to get nailed down to something.
Right. Yeah.
And it's very esoteric with everything, but if you want people to do the thing that you want them to do, you got to say, okay, here it is. Here's the rules.
But really quickly, I just don't want people to forget, because I forgot to talk much about this in my show that I did earlier today. Feels like yesterday. Is on January, it's been a long day. It's either the 14th or the 24th. Cardinal Hummus went through and he released to all of the world's bishops. He was saying, I want all the world's bishops to follow this playbook at the release of the Exhortation. I don't think February 12th.
Remind people too who Cardinal Hummus is if they're having a hard time keeping score.
Cardinal Hummus was replaced by Cardinal Cerny as really the secretary of, wasn't he the secretary of this synod?
I don't remember exactly what happened with the shift there, but Hummus is a Brazilian cardinal close to the Pope, who has been architecting this synod from the very beginning and has been a strong advocate for ordaining married men to the priesthood for years.
Right.
So he shows up all the way back to the election of Pope Francis. He's there kind of waiting in the wings, working this agenda. So he's been there all along.
Definitely. And he was one of the most extreme forces, actual South Americans that wasn't,
not an
Krautler
invading German who had kind of set up there, or an Austrian like Krautler.
Yeah. Has that ever been precedented in history? A German that kind of culturally.
What do we have here? It is very interesting.
It is. Yeah, Germans crossing to South America, taking shelter there in order to instantiate some German ideas in South America. Hummus was one of the most extreme guys. He was saying that, look, the bishops of the world will need this playbook, and it was like 2 or 3 parts, depending on how you look at it. It's going to be a big deal when we release the document that I think was the leaked document, which repeated paragraph 111 from the Amazon from the final document,
which was the one about ordaining married men, pushing for a way to come up with procedures to ordain married men.
Indeed. That one was the one that I think he was referring to. He's like, obviously, this is going to be like an S storm. And so here's the way we're going to release it slowly. You're going to have, like a member from the Amazon, each bishop. You're going to massage it. I don't know his exact 3 steps now. I was tweeting about it in the earlier part of the day. But the point was, he was acknowledging that damage control would be necessary. And that was when he was still operating on what was, at that point, the final iteration of the document. It's turned out to be the penultimate iteration of the document. And they knew that it would require massaging. Tell me, Steve, what in this final document really requires massaging? You would.
Yeah, I mean, it's anodyne by design, but it has this really open-ended rider on its back, which is, by the way, longer than the exhortation itself, not by a great deal, but it's 17,000 words. And there's a ton of open-ended questions there that need to be resolved. It's just one of the pieces why, honestly, there's no authentic theological way that final document could be magisterial, because it doesn't even answer its own questions. So how can that be a teaching that people have to follow? They don't even know what it means. What's the proposition that they have to honor? But at the same time, this feeling is, I'm trying to give it weight. Why in 2018 did he do this apostolic constitution saying automatically synod docs are going to be magisterial? That one flew under the radar for most people. I mean, we wrote an article about it, but it was such a blip that when you mentioned it to me this morning, I had totally forgotten that I wrote an entire article about it, because it came and went, and then nothing happened with it. It wasn't exploited immediately. It was like a Trojan horse.
Right.
And I think it was designed for a synod like this.
Now, Bishop Hummus, in this release plan that he talked about, either January 14th or January 24th, people pardon my memory at the end of the very long day, he also said, I didn't go do my due diligence because I was so busy today, but he released a reading list for all of the bishops. And there was a 2018 document that he mentioned, is 6 documents. One was the first one he mentioned was the final document from the synod itself. And there were 5 others. When he released the 2018 document, my heart skipped a beat, because I was like, oh, is this the 2018 Constitution, which now changes the connectability of
Right.
apostolic, post-synodal apostolic exhortations with the document, and it wasn't it. But my really strong suspicion is that if someone goes and finds that, I tweeted it out a number of times today, go find that reading list. He says you're going to need this to even understand what the exhortation is talking about, because it's like being released in code. It's arcane, and that's what we have.
Yeah.
Go read it, people. Go find this list and go read these documents. I've read 3 of the 6.
Actually, it was a Catholic News Agency report that you got that from, right? I think I'll put a link in the show notes in the related links section so people can see that for themselves. Just this conversation while you were talking, I went and looked something up that I just remembered from the whole Amoris Laetitia debacle. And it was, I don't know if you remember this, but Archbishop Bruno Forte, who was the special secretary for that synod and, was attributed with putting the pro-homosexual language in the document and all this stuff, not a great guy, but a papal appointee to be special secretary. He, at a conference after Amoris Laetitia, I believe, came out, he said this. He said that Pope Francis joked to him, if we speak explicitly about communion for the divorced and remarried, you do not know what a terrible mess we will make. So we won't speak plainly. We will do it in a way that the premises are there. And then I will draw out the conclusions. And then Forte laughs and says, typical of a Jesuit.
I remember.
He said this in public. I
remember. Yeah, and they're doing it again.
Same. History constantly repeats with these guys.
It does. I remember where I was sitting in my desk teaching at school when I read Bruno Forte's words there. Yeah, that's precisely what it is. We have the premises, right? All of the premises are really laid out in the Synod Final Doc there in 17,000 words. We only have one premise that's added by the Post-Synodal Apostolic Exhortation, QA, and it is paragraph 3 and a little bit in paragraph 4 as well, saying, let's form a bridge. Let's link in this other document. The rest of it is nonsense. It's Heil. Everything else in the document, there's probably some stuff on pantheism, Pachamama, that we need to talk about later this week, next week, whatever. But as to the big 2 questions, all of the substantial stuff is front loaded, and the rest of it on those 2 main questions is all just flowery Heil nonsense.
Yeah, it's just verbal chaff, and that's what they do. They fill it with thousands and thousands of words that they know people aren't going to read. Or if they do read it, they're going to find it absolutely frustrating to try to even understand what any of it actually means. I saw people tweeting out quotes from it today going, what is this language?
Yeah. It's kind of a funny sociological experiment, completely papering under your opponent. It's not rising to the level of Amoris Laetitia, 64,000 words or whatever it was, the longest papal document ever. That is only chapter 8 meant anything to him. Do you know how many laughs they probably had at everyone's expense? And then
what was that, 30, 40,000 words?
I thought AL was in the 60s.
Maybe it was 60.
It was in this. Look it up, because it was all I know is it was the longest papal document in the history of, the 2,000-year storied history of the Roman Catholic Church. And I would bet a large sum of money, there's no way to verify it, that they had like a little running joke, like, we're going to make people read chapters 1 through 7, and it's all about 8.
Yeah.
And so the dupes will be out there going, oh, isn't this beautiful? The way they do about Pope Francis, like, you'll get someone getting bleary-eyed saying, oh, it's so poetic and beautiful the way Pope Francis today in his Wednesday audience, he talked about there are 3 persons in the Trinity. And you're like, I didn't say he was wrong with every word that he ever said.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's just that it was irrelevant. It really wasn't what it was about. Right. Here's a good one before we move off of this particular topic. This is paragraph 31 of the exhortation today. It may sound familiar to you, or it may not, because it's total nonsense. 31. Each of the peoples that has survived in the Amazon region possesses its own cultural identity and unique richness in our multicultural universe, thanks to the close relationship established by the inhabitants with their surroundings in a non-deterministic symbiosis, which is hard to conceive using mental categories imported from without. What?
I wish that didn't sound familiar, but it does. I'm sorry to say.
I mean,
punished myself.
non-deterministic symbiosis. That's a good cover band name, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, black metal band
A
from
little bit of thrash
Sweden.
going on there.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so bizarre. And you read this stuff and you realize you've gone through 10 paragraphs and you haven't actually read anything because your eyes have glazed over.
Right, in purgatory. This might maybe we're all in purgatory if we had to read Amoris Laetitia and Querido Amazonia.
I actually think you should get a plenary indulgence for reading any of these. Like, no conditions attached. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to pray for anything.
Right.
You don't even have to be detached from sin. You've done purgatory. It's done. You're dead.
You're
ready for beatific vision.
Yeah.
So here's my question. I mean, with all of the things that we've already discussed in mind, why do you think that they didn't deliver the knockout punch today? So the progressives are mad, some of them, because they're all like, hold on, I thought this was going to be amazing and it didn't open the door to anything. Some progressives, some of the more clever ones, are like, wait a minute, this didn't close any doors. James Martin, SJ, is out there saying that today.
Yeah.
We've got conservatives and traditionalists, some are celebrating, and people like us who are not are getting the crap kicked out of us because we're just negative and cynical about everything. And it's like, no, guys, it's the same thing over and over and over again. You get hit by the same kid every day in the hall on your way to the lunchroom. You eventually start flinching when that kid comes out of the classroom.
Without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think the shrewdest, most dangerously honest progressive that I saw on the internet today was Father Antonio Spadaro, who's really been quiet or on a short leash.
Yeah, lately he hasn't said much.
He has, but he said that it is an accompaniment. I mean, he was being really honest. He was saying what we were saying. Ironically, he agrees with you and I more than almost anyone else I read on the internet today. He said it's an addendum and an accompaniment, the final synod doc with the apostolic exhortation, which is what we're saying. They're basically connected.
Yeah. And this is a guy who, by the way, his unofficial title has been in the past the mouthpiece of Pope Francis.
I remember.
So he's very close to the man. This is not somebody who's speaking out of turn.
Right. So, I mean, what was the question again? You're saying why?
My question is, why didn't they go for the knockout punch in this? Is it because, that they got pushback? Is it because the Benedict and Cardinal Sarah book? Is it because, they thought the chaos of everybody arguing and fighting over all this stuff and spending the next 6 months trying to figure out what express approval means, buys them time to kind of roll it out in the cover of darkness? So what do you think? I mean, it's a theory, but what do you think?
It's a very good question, but it goes to more than just this exhortation. It goes to more than just Amoris Laetitia. It goes to, I would say, the nature of why Peronism works and incrementalism in general. It's strange. Again, Dave Gordon, fellow retrograde, my brother, was asking me that last night when I said my remark about it'll be a footnote, but it won't exactly be a footnote. It'll be something cool I can't even think of right now, like something nifty. You can never think of it ahead of time. And he's saying, well, why do that? Because isn't it just moving back a week or a month or a season, the revelation? If people are going to revolt, not accept it, then won't they just do it in a week, a month, or a season? No, that's not how incrementalism works, and that's not how Peronism works. It works where you get everyone's hackles up and you keep them up. I mean, the people that kind of were waiting for this, like me, I guess Trad Inc.
Yeah,
we're waiting for this. I nearly stayed up till 3, but I was like, that's stupid. I'm going to bed. Everyone gets their hackles up. You get them arguing with each other. You get people coming after you, people coming after me today. And all of that, like adrenaline rush and the kind of anticlimax, it lowers the threshold for
it does.
In human beings for the amount that we can really react to it in a week, a month, or a season. And so, eventually you'll get the Argentine bishops saying, this is our interpretation of Amoris Laetitia, and Francis saying, yes, that's the only correct one. And guys that are marathon runners like me and you, just out of sheer stubbornness going, Eureka, I was right. But at that point, no one does care. It's human nature. It's not.
And even you,
it's
I mean, even
different,
you
but-
only care so much that you are like, see, we weren't wrong. You know, and it's like, but there's no satisfaction in it.
No, they deplete it. They deplete any satisfaction there will be. Because again, it'll be probably not a week. It'll be more like a month or a season. My brother wants to have a bet about it. You know,
Yeah, I saw that, and it's like his time frame is way too short.
It is. I'm like, I don't know what the time frame is, because I don't even remember when the Buenos Aires bishop thing, when he basically, for the first major gut punch, he admitted it, Francis,
Yeah,
that Amoris Laetitia stood for the granting of communion to the civilly divorced and remarried. I can't remember if that was June from April.
yeah, it was summer. I think it was mid to late summer. I'm not 100% sure when he actually did it. So it was 3-4 months, I would say, at least.
Okay.
I had some articles open going into this. So the letter was reported on in September of 2016. That was the first report we put out on emergence of this letter. So we're talking 5 months after Amoris Laetitia that this letter was revealed. And it was revealed by a Spanish language. I mean, it was like one of those, like, it kind of came in the back door and built steam. It wasn't a major news story right away.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's why I refuse to have any wagers with anyone, stranger or brother, on the time frame of this thing.
Or strange brother.
Or a strange brother. A brother so strange that he believes the QA. No, I mean, yeah, that's you got to get up pretty early to fool Steve Skojec or Tim Gordon with the, at least on the Francis magisterium. But yeah, I don't know when he's going to own up to it and admit it. Here's what I do know. One sentence. It'll be long enough separated chronologically from now that it will have that effect of depletion of our joy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you actually have to do when that connection happens is you actually have to remind people of everything we're talking about right now. Like right now, the sausage just came out of the oven. We didn't exactly see all of it made, but it's like, it's fresh in our minds. You know, we know what we're dealing with. 5 months from now, with everything else that's going to have happened in between, in our lives, in the news, in our country, in the church, you're literally going to have to write a retrospective to even bring people back up to speed, because they're not going to be thinking about this anymore. Which
is a big part of what you do. You are always writing retrospectives.
I have to.
That's half the article before you get to what. No, you do have to. I know, and but you ask,
and it's exhausting as my
that?
memory gets worse. It's harder and harder to be like, oh, what was that article that I wrote that talked about this?
I know, but totally, I agree 100% with basically everything you've said. But question asked, question answered is what I'm saying. You're like, why do they do this? Because that you have to remind the nanosecond memoried American and Western public of like, okay, you guys were kind of talking ish on these guys that were saying that QA doesn't close the door on these revolutionary ideas to guys like Skojec. Well, you have to write up a memory jog, even though you remember it, you have to write up a memory jogging retrospective, like anthology on it. And then the people don't really care anyway. They never really care.
No, they don't. And they're like,
whatever. And so it works. That's the point.
Yeah. And then you're by that time, there's another new thing that they're doing that you're actually more worried about too.
Exactly.
And so what it becomes is it's an obligation to say, hey, that time bomb that just went off, that one that we told you about. And they're like, which one?
Right.
And it's like, I mean, it's so effective. And I try sometimes to put myself in the mindset of, if I was an evil bastard dictator, mastermind, how would I even know? Like, do I put it in my Outlook calendar that 6 months from now, take step 2, and this is what it is?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't keep it straight, and I cover this stuff every day. How do they do this so effectively every time?
I mean, it is smart. It's very shrewd, but I think they operate like this all the time. And there are scientists among them. By scientists, I mean guys like Saul Alinsky that are like, here are the rules. Here's the way you do it.
Yeah.
And they've been operating on it for so long. It's kind of like what Alinsky said about criminals. Like, they're smart. His little
Yeah.
system he used to go around Chicago restaurants with the free pass. I don't know if you ever saw the Dinesh D'Souza movie, but
No.
you figure out ways to game the system. Yeah, criminals are very low IQ, but they're very good at gaming the system, and it's those qualities don't necessarily seem like they go together. Part of it's just habit, but they are good at it. You got to hand it to them. They're good. They're good at winning.
They're very good.
Yeah.
And so then the question that I will leave you with is, as we look out, I mean, it's February. It's hard to believe it's only February, because I feel like it should be summer by now with all the stuff that's gone on in the first month and a half of 2020. Seriously. Where do you see this issue playing out over the year? And do you see anything else right now that is going to compete with it? Because remember, Amoris Laetitia led to months and months of endless discussions, of scholarly analysis, of the issuing of theological censures, the Father Wynandy letter, of the dubia. I mean, there were a lot of big milestone moments that happened as a response to Amoris Laetitia. I don't know if they learned from that, because Amoris Laetitia was more, hey, boom, here's the atomic footnote. Now we don't even have anything in this. And it's going to be harder to get a grip, get traction on it. But I mean, is this going to guide the discussion that we are, you and me and everybody like us, all the grifters are having for the next 6 months? It's so absurd. I just have to make fun of it.
It's fun.
But I mean, is it going to guide our discussion, or is it going to fade away? I don't know. I'm honestly not sure.
Well, I'll say this. I'll take a step back. I honestly don't know either, but I will do kind of what we're talking about and be anti-magnanimous and sort of say, I told you so. Conservatives on generally on our side of things that I respect. One was Taylor back on the TNT days for me. Another was Pat Coffin. They both said in late-ish 2019, maybe September, October, they said, I think Francis is going to step down in 2020. And I said, never.
Nope.
Never do leftists give up power the way so-called right-wing people do, conservative people do, because then you are subjecting yourself to the odds of what were we just talking about. Benedict might have thought that Cardinal Angelo Scola was going to take over, probably, and it was, who did we get? Bergoglio. So leftists know this. When you have 100%, you never bet on even a 70% shot. So I know that Francis is saying he is taking walks. He's healthier than he was. Even he's lighter physically. He's less, weighs less than when he was in the early part of his pontificate. And
that's weird. I'm the exact opposite. In the early part of his pontificate, I was much less, and then all the stress has had its toll.
He's like Benjamin Button, or in reverse, as Michael Scott says. We all age like Benjamin Button in reverse. But so, I mean, I think he's getting really, really motivated to continue the Sankt Gallen plan, continue Cardinal Martini, the Don's vision for this thing, keep making a mess. He has been so good to his word, when he said he was going to make a mess of things. We've never known a conservative political candidate or religious figure in our lives anyway that was so good to his word as Francis is to his constituency. And yes,
I think Trump is actually probably the closest.
He's the closest, and I still win. You live in Arizona, I live in California. We still don't have that wall built, man. I mean,
yeah, I know. But some people think Francis's influence is waning. I mean, I'm hearing that more and more, that he has more and more enemies because even the people who agree with him don't like him because he's not a really nice guy. That his political capital is largely spent. For people like Cardinal Parolin, Cardinal Secretary of State, who's a diplomat, Francis is a bull in a china shop. But for the Germans, he doesn't move fast enough. And they're constantly goading him about, we want to do all this crazy stuff. And he's like, don't tell people. Don't put it on the record that you're going to do this heretical thing, because then they can pin you on that. Like, go around the back door. And then now I'm even hearing things like, and think about it. Peter's Pence is under investigation. There's been this investigation of the Papal Foundation. There's rumors that money flowing into the Vatican is dropping, and the donors are like, you're toxic. I don't want to give it to you. So I wonder, how he rehabilitates, because he's not a popular guy, and he hasn't been for a while. I talked to a guy who worked at the Vatican like 4 or 5 years ago, and he was like, everybody can't stand him. He's a jerk. He comes in at the Christmas address and he just scolds everybody and tells everybody how awful they are. And, he's not good to his own people, and he doesn't inspire loyalty.
Right. But I'm going to push back here. I guess the first and only time. I mean, he's in with the globalists, man. He's in with Ban Ki-moon.
No, that's true.
He's in with Ban Ki-moon. He's in with the Soros guy, Jeffrey Sachs. They have an open invitation. He's in with the anti-Trump crowd, which I think is kind of an interesting phenomenon as it plays out in neocon versus trad American circles. Maybe that's why he's a little more popular, all his anti-Americanism with the trads than he was 4 years ago. Either way, I think he's got powerful enough moneyed friends, that's not going to force him out. And he's radical enough for even the Germans that they know they're not going to get another. There's no guarantee, even if it's Cardinal Tagle or something, it becomes Francis II. Mm-hmm. We've toyed with that idea of Cardinal Tagle. I don't think anyone's going to be this good at keeping their foot on the pedal. And yes, he's lost the kind of guys in the middle. Everyone kind of knows he's pretty much just a globalist at his heart, an anti-Trump, anti-North American globalist. That's really what I think is driving it. I used to think he was destroying the world in order to maybe change the church. Now I think he's changing the church in order to destroy the Western world. So I go back and forth on what's the telos and what's the expedient toward that telos. I don't think that he will have lost so much political capital that it's going to be a threat to him, though. Seeing the responses today, I mean, more conservatives in the church than not are saying, "Oh, well, there's some good there after all," and they're giving you the Luke about Vader, line. I think he's here to stay.
No, I mean, and I would agree with you that he's never going to give up power. It's been his motivating, animating principle forever. And when you give up so many things to attain it, you don't let it go easily.
Right. God be with us, man. I don't know what else to say.
I don't either. Tim, it is always good to talk to you. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
You too, bro. Yeah, always great to have a chat. We're not just sitting here saying, yes, I agree. I don't think either of us is ever accused of claiming we agree when we don't. I have always agreed with your takes on what's going on in this entire pontificate. Like, yep, that. So it's fun talk.
It's good to have friends in weird places, I guess.
In trad places. We are Trad Inc. Give to us every chance you get.
All right, man. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, peace.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of the OnePeterFive podcast. I want to thank you for listening. If you're on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, for watching, if you're joining us on YouTube, we ask that whatever platform you're coming from, you subscribe, that you share our videos and or podcasts, that you leave us reviews where you can on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever they allow you to leave reviews so that other people can find our content. And we ask you, please, as always, if you enjoy our work, support us at onepeterfive.com/donate. Until next time, I'm Steve Skojak. Thank you for tuning in to the OnePeterFive podcast.